In the next few years, I can definitely see AI doing things like finding or generating establishing shots for us. If your goal is to cut, then make sure you're prioritizing what the editor gives you. The editor's the person that's probably going to put you forward for cutting or give you those opportunities to step up.
So you were an assistant for about 5 or 6 years before you actually got into the editor's chair. How important was that?
I think it's really important because I don't really see how I would be doing the job I am now without that experience as an assistant.
Welcome to Master the Workflow's interview series. Today we've got Robert Frost, the editor on Apple TV's Slow Horses. We're really excited to have him. Welcome, Robert.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to talking through everything with you.
Yeah, so am I. So congratulations. You've also done the show Hijack with Idris Elba and The Landscapers with Olivia Colman. Wow, really high profile shows. So let me know right off the bat, how did you get the gig on Slow Horses? That's a big Apple show. And for, again, such a young man, it's a big deal.
Yeah, I feel definitely very fortunate to be working on it. I was a fan of the show, beforehand. I'd watched the first 2 seasons, and I was working on Hijack at that time. So, like with a lot of shows that I like, I go in a bit of an IMDb deep dive and try and see, do I know anyone who knows anyone? And, this was, I didn't have an agent at the time. It was just me sort of trying to find out whether I had any connections. Turns out that 2 of the producers on Hijack also did Slow Horses. So there was an immediate link there. Jamie Lawrence and Hakan Kuseta were the 2 producers that were that link. So after a screening on Hijack, I sort of casually asked them about the show, and they gave me an email address of one of the other producers. And it was just good timing that they were about to start thinking about their 4th season, and I got an interview. So, when you get one of those interviews, you sort of, this is the director, I think they gave me maybe the first script, but I just tried to do as much research as possible. So, I watched one of Adam's films on Netflix, and the good thing about Slow Horses is it's a series of books. So I had all of that sort of knowledge there. And I'm not the best reader, but I bought the first 4 books and I plowed through them in the space of 2 or 3 weeks, just so that I had something to talk about in this interview. And I don't know whether that was helpful in the end, but I think hopefully, being able to sort of talk about the characters, the story with some enthusiasm, hopefully it sort of, I got picked out of a crowd maybe because of that extra knowledge, who knows. But it definitely helped me feel more confident going into that interview. And then, got the job.
Yeah, I agree. Any research you can do when you go up for an interview like that, it's really going to, I think, put the lights on for whoever's interviewing. You have, a little bit deeper knowledge than the average person.
Absolutely.
So cool. That's exciting. And again, what we always stress, in our program is it's the network and the folks who you met on Hijack referring you. That's the natural course of events in editorial, or that's the way you would like it to be, because you're building that network and you're making friends who will recommend you if they like your work. That's exactly right.
And I think, if I were watching this, I'd be maybe sitting there thinking, well, okay, how did he get the job? He knew the producers. But, I remember sort of being at university and studying film and hearing this phrase, it's who you know and not what you know, and thinking, well, I don't know anyone. But I think what you realize is you do make those connections naturally, starting however you start. Suddenly, this person, suddenly, that person. And as long as you're a nice person, hopefully you're going to get recommended for the next thing and the next thing.
Yeah, a nice person and also a talented person, which you obviously are.
Sure.
So let me ask you, tell me, what is the most challenging thing editorially cutting Slow Horses?
I think it's a really well-written show. One of the things it does have is a lot of characters. So trying to keep all of those storylines in play and making sure you're checking in on all those different characters is something that definitely comes into play a lot in the fine cut. We have quite complicated stories, but you don't want it to become convoluted. So in the first episode of season 4, you've got so many things to set up. You've got a bomb that goes off in London. You've also got what might be the killing of a central character. And, there's a lot of conversation in the cutting room around which of these is more engaging, which order should they come in, and sort of navigating those conversations and being willing to try out different versions of an episode was really challenging, but satisfying, because I think we got there in the end.
Yeah. Now, what about episode 5? That's coming up on October 2nd, or it will have played on October 2nd, depending on when you see this video. Tell us about your approach in terms of cutting the dialogue scenes versus the action scenes. I mean, there's a lot to offer in the footage. So how did you approach all that?
Yeah, I think I find the action scenes weirdly easier, even though they maybe look more complicated. I think with dialogue, especially with these scenes where you have 4, 5, 6 or more characters, as you say, there's often a lot of coverage. So when I'm watching the dailies, I'm basically watching it thinking, okay, give me a reason to use this shot. Why did they shoot this? And as the editor, sometimes you are a bit disconnected from the rest of the crew. Maybe they had conversations, they've planned out their shot list. You might not be privy to that, and just the nature of TV, the amount of stuff that they're shooting. So I'm watching, what is this shot for? Is it because that character has a particular line? Why did they do a close up on them? Is the scene about them? You're sort of asking all those questions. And usually when you're watching the dailies, you'll find, okay, there's a specific performance that actor gave in that particular take, so I'm going to remember that. Or, they give me this great performance in this take, and then they throw a look to another character, and you're like, great, that gives me the impetus to cut to that character. So when I'm watching the dailies, I have my have all the shots in list view, and I sort of write comments beside them to remind myself of, what I liked about a particular performance, or, this take was a more feisty performance, or, a more subdued performance.
Even that look or that moment.
Exactly. And, you can do it with comments, or I'll, just throw down a load of markers on the shot, just so that when I come back to it, it's not as overwhelming. And then in terms of how I then build that scene, I basically, I put the wide down on the timeline, and then I watch it through, and then I think, when do I not want to be on this wide? When do I need to cut to someone because they're speaking? And, that first assembly can be quite simple. You just cut to whoever's talking, and then you just take the time to sort of build up the subtleties of cutting away and the inserts, and, how are we telling the story?
I feel the exact same way. Sometimes I'll just string a rough cut together just to get the flow of the dialogue, and then I'll go in and I'll really be able to massage it once you get the flow. Very good.
Exactly.
So in American television, we usually only get a couple of days with the director. I mean, if the director is the executive producer and has shot the pilot and is on for the long haul, maybe it's different. But is it the same in the UK? Do you usually work just a day or two with the director and then maybe longer with the writer producers?
It's actually completely different, which is fascinating to me, because so for me, Adam Randall was the director of all 6 episodes of season 4, and he was there throughout the entirety of post. So he was there from day 1 of prep to the very final sign off on the episodes. When he joined us in the cutting room, they were finishing off season 3, and the director for season 3, Saul, was downstairs in the online, literally doing the final checks of like dead pixels on. So the director's there throughout the whole thing. We don't really have the term showrunner here. I mean, some shows do. And yeah, Will Smith is our showrunner. but it's Adam that's there with us, fine tuning the edit. Then, we'll have a viewing. Eventually the producers will view, then it'll go to Apple, and Adam's throughout that whole process with us, helping us to work those notes and finish everything off.
Well, the director almost becomes the showrunner in that sense.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's one of the interesting things about Slow Horses is that it's sort of a rolling production and a different director coming on each time. So they have ownership over that particular story. And, it's great for us because you do have that continuity, and it's someone who knows it inside out. They know what material they have because they shot it. So they're not giving you crazy notes where you can't do it because they never got that shot. So, I love it, and I'm intrigued to perhaps one day work on a show in the States and see how different that experience is.
Yeah, it's quite different. I've worked on episodic where literally the director gets, like I said, 2 or 3 days. So, alrighty. Well, listen, moving on. I want to know how long you get to cut a show. I mean, how many days do they shoot a Slow Horses, for example?
Good question. I'm so glad you gave me this question in advance because I looked up to get you some specific details. So for season 4, it was 105 days shoot.
Wow.
Just the shoot for 6 episodes. So I started in March last year and finished around November, and then came back a couple of months later for pickups and to join them in the mix. So it's quite a long stint.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a long one.
That's amazing. Episodic in the States that I've worked on, 7, maybe 8 days shoot and 3-week cut. So,
wow.
It's quite a difference. But then again, that's when we were doing 22, 26 episodes a season. So
exactly.
It's much more like factory work, and yours sounds much more like making feature films.
I think that's right. I think it is. They do treat it as a feature film, and you have that time to really really work on it. I'm intrigued, with these 24 episode series. I remember growing up watching the show 24, which had 24, and I love that show. And I used to think, how do they have so much story? How do they pump this out? One a week. But yeah, it's very different on Slow Horses.
Yeah. No, it was like factory work. And the nature of television has changed dramatically, since the birth of streaming, and we do have much shorter seasons, 6, 8, 10 maybe episodes. So, I guess that's just part of the nature of the beast. So, but it's great because now you're seeing, the top actors doing television, not, just the television people and the top directors. So it's a very exciting time to be cutting television.
Yeah, I think so. I think I definitely feel very fortunate that I think I got in at a really good time when there was this streaming boom and, a lot of investment in productions in the UK as well. So yeah, hopefully it continues.
Switching subjects, let me ask you, what made you decide to become an editor?
I'm one of those people that's always been interested in filmmaking in general. I know that I was like 9 or 10 years old and doing little animations and things. Like I was that person. And weirdly, there was this. So I used to make animated films with Lego, right? And around that time, in the early 2000s, there was a Lego set that came out called the Steven Spielberg Movie Maker set. And I kid you not, it came with a little webcam and it came with a little manual of how to do stock frame animation. And it came with a non-linear editor.
No.
And so I had this realization a few years ago that like the idea of like, 2 windows and a timeline and a bin of sound effects, like that was very natural to me because I was doing it when I was like 10 years old. So hopefully I can credit Steven Spielberg a little bit with his tie-in with Lego for wanting to become an editor.
That's amazing. That's an amazing story.
Thanks. Yeah. I think, it just seemed inevitable really that hopefully I could turn it into a career. And I'm thankful that I've been able to do that.
So what were the concrete steps you took once you knew that? Obviously, maybe not at 10 or so, but later on, what were the concrete steps you took to become an editor?
Sure. I did go to university here in the UK, and I studied a film and TV production course, which was really fun. At that time, I still wasn't sure if it was definitely editing that I wanted to do. It took me a few years to figure out that was the area that I wanted to go into. And sort of the practical steps really were moving to London, which, you know, for better or worse, is where a lot of the work is in the UK. You know, we have Soho in the centre of London, which is basically a square mile of post facilities and now, you know, sort of very expensive bars and restaurants. We sort of mixed it with it.
Yes, I've actually eaten at one of those very expensive bars across the street from Warner Brothers Post. What do they call it? Warner Brothers DEA or
Delane Lee? Is it there?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Warner Brothers, they've opened up a brand new building as well, which looks very fancy, which I haven't been into yet.
It's a cool part of town.
It is really exciting, and it's sort of strange that it's right there, like right next to all the sort of touristy places of London. You have this hub, and I think a lot of people do like having their productions there because, yeah, you have your cutting room, and then down the street is your soundstage. You've got a bajillion ADR, you know, suites. So there's definitely a lot going on there.
Okay, so you moved down to London.
So I moved to London, and I basically just handed out my CV at various post facilities. And one of them, which is no longer there now, called Encore, gave me a job as a runner. And I think it is just a numbers game of they had someone who had left and there was an opportunity. So, you know, I did go to university, but I did also sort of start at the bottom. And I was running around getting coffee for people and meeting all sorts of people. Eventually, there was an assistant editor there who had a trainee that was leaving for another job, but they still needed someone. So this assistant, her name was Lizzie Dray. She basically invited the runners one at a time to come into her room and just learn the Avid, you know, for an hour for lunchtime. And I was like, great, this is my opportunity. So I sort of went in and took notes. And then, you know, a few weeks later, she told us, oh, yeah, I mean, I do actually need someone to fill this role now. She ended up choosing me because I had taken these notes. And it wasn't some sort of ploy by me. It was just genuine sort of eagerness to make sure that if I was given the opportunity, I sort of knew how to do it, because I actually had never touched Avid at that point. It wasn't available for free. So I just wanted to make sure it was the basics of like where the buttons were and what I needed to do. And then from that point, you know, once you've got that first trainee credit, it's slightly easier to sort of start to move around and work your way up.
Yeah. That's another amazing story. I always love to hear how each individual sort of got their foot in the door, because that's such a critical part. So you were an assistant for about 5 or 6 years before you actually got into the editor's chair. How important was that?
I think it's really important because I don't really see how I would be doing the job I am now without that experience as an assistant. And so many of the editors that I worked for and now alongside also went through that route. I think, you know, you learn those creative skills as an editor, as an assistant editor. You learn the technical skills from other assistants as well. But I think you also learn those soft skills of, you know, like how to work with other people, how to communicate creative ideas properly, and just those little things of like, you know, when to knock on someone's door and when not to, and just this, all that sort of stuff that you just learn from being in a cutting room, I think is super valuable. And as a second assistant editor, you get to jump around a lot and work on lots of different projects because usually your contracts are a bit shorter. And then as a first assistant editor, for me, it was then sticking with one editor as their assistant. And his name was David Webb. He's an amazing editor. I guess he was my sort of mentor. You know, I worked alongside him on Hijack. I assisted him on a show for Netflix called Sex Education, another one called Criminal. And, you know, having that sort of direct relationship with someone where, you know, you can come into their room, you can sort of watch them work. You know, that was really what then got me in the right rooms for then talking about editing on a show. So, yeah, hopefully I can sort of do the same with someone at some point.
Yeah, that's the goal. I love hearing that story because so many people think that assisting is just purely a technical and non-creative job. But you're there in the trenches, man. You're there with the editor and they are showing you, you're almost learning the creative process through osmosis because you're watching and you're working on the same material and you see it evolve over time. So I'm really glad you cleared that up and, you know, made it because we're not just, you know, machines as assistants. We are creative people.
Yeah, and just to jump off that, like it's a really hard job being an assistant editor because you have to be in so many different spaces at once. You've got so many requests coming into you. And the one thing that I tried to remember is that I'm an assistant editor. So although I've got to like, you know, have a great relationship with the post producer and all the other departments and give them what they need and do the turnovers on time, you know, if your goal is to cut, then make sure you're prioritizing what the editor gives you. You know, if they ask you to have a go at assembling a scene or lay up some sound or do some temp VFX, like make that the priority because the editor's the person that's probably going to put you forward for cutting or give you those opportunities to step up. They're the person that you want to impress, basically.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. Alrighty, changing up again. I want to ask you because this is a really pressing issue. And in fact, I've started a newsletter about it and how it affects filmmaking, because it's going to affect us. Has AI affected your work in any way as a film editor? And if so, tell us how.
Not so much yet as an editor, but I feel like I'm an early adopter, so I expect it to, and I'm not scared of it. I think, you know, if in the next few years, I can definitely see AI doing things like finding or generating establishing shots for us, or, you know, because so many times on shows like Slow Horses is, you know, they're going to shoot all of the exterior cutaway shots at the end of the shoot, and you just need a shot of a certain building in London or whatever. And usually you go and trawl through stock sites. I can definitely see AI like speeding up that. Or I can say, you know, I just need an insert shot of a hand doing this, you know, or typing on a keyboard, and it can generate it for you as temp. I'm looking forward to that being a thing. And, you know, hopefully that if you have tools that do that, it frees up the assistants to sort of be doing other more creative things rather than searching for stock footage, which I've done so much of as an assistant and is just so frustrating.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that, you know, sort of the searching and, you know, Avid has the AI phrase find now. You know, I really think that there's a big misconception that AI is just going to sweep in and replace editors, because so much of the media talks about how AI is affecting editing. But again, there's such a misconception of what editing is to the greater public. I think, or from my perspective, they're talking more about visual effects types of things where I think that's where AI will actually, you know, have a big impact, as well as things like animation. Mm-hmm. But the actual creative process of editing, I think that's a ways off.
I think it's a way off. And I think, you know, those tools that, you know, we might eventually have where you can, you know, rather than having to remember a take or a performance, if you can ask an AI to sort of, oh, find me the take where, you know, Gary Oldman did this and then looked left and it was, you know, this sort of shot size. That's great. And, you know, hopefully AI is not going to take over our jobs. I feel like it won't unless it becomes a sort of Terminator style thing where it forces us out of the cutting rooms. Like, we just won't let it happen, surely. Hopefully, anyway.
Yeah, that's a scary thought, but that's science fiction also. So let's just keep our fingers crossed.
Sure.
So what advice would you have for people who are, you know, who want to become film editors? What, you know, obviously you talked about your route. What advice would you have for newcomers?
I would say that, the tried and tested route of getting in on the ground floor as a runner, as a trainee, is still a viable option. And, I've definitely seen that become more of a challenge with, post-COVID, people working from home, that sort of idea of a post facility where everyone's comes in at the same time and is in the kitchen making coffee and you sort of meeting people is slightly less of a thing these days. But it is still out there. And I think if you can find production companies or post houses that are making the sort of thing that you'd eventually want to work on, and just, be willing to work for them, be flexible, make sure you learn the software, because you can get Avid for free these days from home. Hopefully, if you're, eager and enthusiastic, I'd hope that those opportunities are still there.
Yeah, I think they are. And again, the editorial world is always changing. And it's just a means of it. It's just important to keep adapting and learning the new tools that are out there. I worked on film for 10 years, splicing together 35 millimeter, and then the Avid came along. So,
whereas I'm an editor that's never touched a piece of celluloid film. I wouldn't know how to do that, and that's
you're making me feel.
I'm so sorry.
You're making me feel old again.
No, I
Robert,
feel nostalgic for that. I really would love someone to show me that. It's just not how we do it these days. And just to bounce off that, like one little anecdote as well is like, just reach out to people. I used to do it all the time. Email people, message them on Twitter. Like one of our assistants on Hijack, I first met him because he DM'd me on Twitter, and we just started talking, and you go for a coffee, and, don't necessarily expect everything to lead to a job, but all of that sort of actually talking to people in the real world is really valuable.
Yeah, building relationships. Absolutely. So let me ask you, before we set up this interview, had you heard of Master the Workflow, and do you know anybody who has taken the course?
I've heard great things about it. I was definitely aware of it. I personally hadn't used it, but in the sort of editing sphere, I'd seen so many people mention it. And it's one of the links that I send to people when they're asking me about how to get their foot in the door. I've seen the testimonials on the website, and I know a few people that have done it. And I think it's a great tool.
Cool. Well, listen, Robert, I really appreciate your time, and I know you're busy, and congratulations again on your success and this season of Slow Horses. And let's stay in touch. Maybe you can do a guest speakership at one of our open houses or something like that.
I'd love to do that. I mean, as I say, I feel like I've got to where I am because of the mentorship of others. So I'm really happy to help out however I can. And thanks for the conversation. It's really fun to talk about.
Thank you.